Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here representing Jason Blaha Strength and Fitness, and I thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit today about eggs. If you guys would though, please give me a like down below. If you're not subscribed or following, please do so, and if you will be kind enough to drop me a comment down under the video, I would greatly appreciate that. Let's get over to the topic. Someone brought this up to me on my Facebook actually. They argued with me, said, look, why are you arguing about science? Scientists change their mind a dozen times on whether eggs are healthy. And look, people bring stuff like this up without stopping thinking this through. Instead of just saying, aha, these scientists have gone back and forth on this, they never actually researched why they went back and forth or stopped and thought about maybe the fact that they needed more data, they needed more equipment to take measurements, they needed better ways to look at the math. This one was very confusing for a good reason. So what people need to understand, this is why in science, so anyone who's taken a basic science class understands this. So we need to understand correlation and causation and why this one was massively confusing for scientists for decades, right? So everyone who's taken a basic science class understands that we have to have this conversation about correlation and causation, right? In other words, correlation means two things are associated with each other. Causation means that not only are they associated, but one of them causes the other, and we have found the pathway and the evidence that it causes it. Okay? Ooh, there we go. So that's a big one. And in this case, yes, egg consumption is correlated with cardiovascular disease. Okay? It's associated. And it's associated for some good reasons. But is it actually causative? And the answer at this point looks like probably not. So the people understand the difference. The way one of my biology professors in a freshman biology class explained this, he's like, understanding correlation between causation. He's like, we did a study showing that the correlation between the number of appliances in a household versus teenage pregnancy. So we found an inverse correlation. In other words, the more appliances that were in the kitchen of a family, okay, the lower the rates of teenage pregnancy in that family. Wow. So if we were to look at that and without going further, we would say, oh, so clearly having more appliances in your kitchen, keeps your teenage daughters from getting pregnant, right? It reduces it. This was a biology professor explained this. And we all had a laugh about it. He goes, now what's the reality? They are correlated. They're associated. In other words, there's other factors at play. Okay. Families that have more appliances in the kitchen usually have a higher socioeconomic status, a higher level of education. They're more likely to not be a single parent household too. Not saying this is entirely true, but on average, if you were to take the whole span of, say, the country, and you were to tally this up, you would find a massive link there, right? Because again, having more money usually means more appliances in your kitchen, and that's all linked to all these things. Well, guess what? Guess what else is associated with this? How much time, the free time the parents then have to spend with the kids. Two-parent household, more money, higher education levels, higher chance of education, sex education, higher chance of birth control, all these things, right? Also, parents more likely to have the free time, at least one of the parents, to be more involved in the kids' lives, to see what they're up to, okay? This was all found in this. And so you have to understand when you go over and look at eggs, guess what? We know based upon early data that foods that were high in cholesterol, because we know this is already confirmed, elevated LDL is the driver of atherosclerosis. This has been causative, it's found, it's understood. So we're looking at blood cholesterol though. Like even back then they knew, okay, elevated blood cholesterol absolutely correlated. So they're like, aha, people who eat higher cholesterol foods tend to have higher blood cholesterol. This is a correlation. Problem is it's not causation. Okay? Here's the issue. There's a 90% overlap between saturated fat and cholesterol in foods. 90% of foods that are really high in saturated fat are also really high in cholesterol. The problem is it's only 90%. All right? We figured out later through more and more data and studying and looking at the human body and correlations and absorptions and measurements that actually saturated fat is what's driving blood cholesterol up for the most part. And even that isn't entirely. There are actually protective factors in play. There's a lot of cardioprotective factors that can affect it doing so. So in some cases, saturated fat doesn't do it. Boy, that gets complicated. All right, so then you come over and say, okay, they didn't know that early on. It turns out we're not even fully absorbing the dietary cholesterol. It oftentimes isn't even absorbed, and most of what's in our blood for the LDL that we're concerned with is made in the liver. Okay, it's making it largely from saturated fats, so that's the number one driver of that. Okay. The researchers didn't know this, so they assumed, because we have all these foods, it must be eating cholesterol makes your cholesterol go up. Okay? This is not an unreasonable assumption if you didn't have enough sophisticated equipment to measure it. So you can't get mad at researchers 40 or 50 or 60 years ago from coming to this conclusion. Okay? They didn't have the technology we have. It's not a massive leap. Especially when they noted people who eat higher cholesterol foods on average have more heart disease. Wow, there's definitely a correlation. Well, here's the issue. Guess what else elevates LDL? Coconut oil massively shoots LDL up. It's a zero cholesterol food. It's really high in saturated fat. Horrible for your heart health. Eggs don't seem to affect it so much. In fact, some of the parts of eggs can be cardioprotective. Okay. All right. They didn't know this, so they saw the cholesterol. Guess what else they saw? People say, so why then were eggs correlated? Because what do people eat with eggs? So if we come back over, people who eat eggs tended to eat them in the morning in Western countries. What do they tend to eat them with? Toast with butter oftentimes, right? And other refined sugars, right? Some jam on it, some jelly. Bacon, sausage. Okay, bacon and sausage, these absolutely cause heart disease. This is not even subject to debate. They absolutely massively shoot up LDL, all sorts of risks. You're eating it with the eggs. Well, what else? Eating refined flour, carbohydrate with some sugar added, adding some extra sugar, adding some extra refined saturated fat in the form of butter. This is a bad combination. All these foods are going to shoot cardiovascular disease up also. So then they're still seeing a correlation. There's a correlation at play here, but it's not causative. As it's been studied more and more studies have looked at it and found, look, the individual egg consumption itself, eating an egg, one egg every day, doesn't seem to be even correlated by itself. When you take these other foods out, it doesn't seem to be correlated at all with it. And in fact, if you eat a fairly high fiber diet with it, people who have the egg have a slightly lower rate. Well, lo and behold. This is why they flip-flop, though. The correlations, not understanding that it was saturated fat, not cholesterol, causing cholesterol to go up. Okay? I mean, that took a bit of science for researchers to figure that out. That was not an easy thing for them to learn. Then you have the correlation with the other foods that we tend to eat with eggs with breakfast being major drivers of cardiovascular disease. Okay? That's why it took a really long time for researchers to start realizing this may not be the case. This is why you have to measure things and look at it.